I was staring at the stack of bills on my desk when he walked in. Alimony statement, $2,800. Child support notice, $2,400. Shady Grove Memory Care Facility invoice, $4,500. Riley's college deposit reminder, $15,000 due next month. The numbers were doing that thing where they blur together into one giant red warning light. Then Brad Kellerman leaned against my office door frame like he owned the building. "Half of that $250,000 client bonus is mine," he said, flashing that practice smile he probably learned in some executive leadership seminar. The guy had the confidence of someone who'd never missed a mortgage payment in his life. "I'm Jake Sullivan, 47 years old, senior project manager at Stonebridge Consulting. 8 years Navy logistics before 15 years corporate. Right now I was calculating whether Brad's announcement meant I could still make my dad's memory care payment next month." "We crushed this project together, partner," Brad continued, adjusting those gold cufflinks that probably cost more than my car payment. Synergistic collaboration. That's what moves the needle in today's business environment. Partner. 6 months of 6 a.m. calls with Colonel Porter at Langston Manufacturing, and Brad shows up to one golf tournament fundraiser where the client happened to be present. Now we're partners. I didn't say anything. Navy logistics taught me to assess before reacting. Target identification first. Brad was mid-30s, MBA from some prestigious school, VP of Business Development for exactly 3 months. The kind of guy who said things like leverage our core competencies and optimize stakeholder engagement protocols without irony. His LinkedIn probably had a post about crushing Q3 scheduled to auto-publish the minute my bonus hit his account. He strolled off before I could respond, already pulling out his phone like he was checking which country club to celebrate at. Left me sitting there with my stack of bills and the sudden realization that my financial lifeline had just been cut in half. 6 months. That's how long I'd been carrying Langston Manufacturing through their ERP system upgrade. 6 months of babysitting a legacy platform that belonged in a computer museum. Windows XP, I'm not kidding. These people were running mission-critical operations on software older than my daughter Alex. 6 months of managing stakeholders who needed 4 meetings to decide on a font color. 6 months of sitting through procurement disputes that made Navy supply chain arguments look civilized. 6 months of keeping this integration breathing through 3 CFO changes and a Christmas party incident where their lead engineer got drunk and confessed they'd been running unsecured admin access for 2 years. I fixed that quietly, off the books, because that's what you do when you want repeat business. Brad's contribution? He CC'd himself on a status email I sent at midnight 2 weeks ago. Added a smiley face emoji. Real value add stuff. But this felt different from the usual corporate credit theft. This time I had something Brad didn't know about. Documentation. Every decision log, every client call summary, every problem solved and crisis averted. 8 years of military record-keeping habits don't just disappear when you trade dress blues for business casual. The financial reality was crushing down like deck plates under pressure. After taxes, that bonus would cover exactly 6 months of obligations. Rent, alimony, both kids' expenses, dad's care. Without it, I'd be choosing which bills to pay and which ones to let slide into collections. Riley's college deposit would have to wait, maybe permanently. Brad thought he was claiming money. What he was really claiming was my family's stability. I opened my laptop and started pulling files. CRM entries from day 1 of the Langston engagement. Email threads going back 8 months where I'm walking their technical team through deployment phases while Brad was probably updating his LinkedIn with motivational quotes about disrupting traditional paradigms. The digital forensics painted a clear picture. Project initiation meeting, Jake Sullivan, primary contact. Technical requirements gathering, Jake Sullivan, lead analyst. Risk assessment documentation, Jake Sullivan, author. Client approval workflows, Jake Sullivan, coordinator. Every milestone, every deliverable, every late-night crisis call had my signature on it. Brad's digital footprint, 3 emails in 6 months. 1 auto-reply when he was at some leadership retreat in Cabo. 1 great work team generic response to a client success announcement. And that smiley face emoji on my midnight status update. Military logistics teaches you that supply chains have weak links. Brad had just revealed himself as the weakest link in this entire operation. Problem was, he didn't know the supply chain well enough to realize he'd just declared war on the guy who controlled every critical resource. I pulled up our internal bonus eligibility criteria, buried in the company portal like classified documents. Found the PDF with language that might as well have been written in my blood. Performance-based disbursements must be directly correlated to project ownership and client continuity. Client continuity. Colonel Porter and I had been talking twice a week for 6 months. I knew his granddaughter's name was Emma. I knew he was former Air Force procurement. I knew he valued reliability above everything else because his last vendor had ghosted them mid-project 3 years ago. Brad didn't even know Colonel Porter's first name was Alan. Time for tactical assessment. Brad wanted credit for my work? Fine. I'd document exactly what that credit was worth. And when this was over, everyone would see the difference between someone who earned their position and someone who networked into it. The stack of bills was still sitting on my desk, but they looked different now. Not like threats, like motivation, like targets that needed to be neutralized. Brad had just picked a fight with someone trained to win them. He was about to learn that military precision doesn't stop working when you put on a civilian uniform. Intelligence started flowing the next morning. Not through meetings or formal channels, but the way it always does in corporate environments. Overheard conversations, shared frustrations, people finally willing to talk when they realize they're not alone. Tony Rodriguez from operations was filling his coffee mug when I walked into the break room. Former Army Supply Sergeant, 15 years at Stonebridge, the kind of guy who actually reads the small print on contracts. He glanced around, saw we were alone, and leaned over. Brad pulled this same move with Pete Walsh last year, Tony said, voice low. Q2 client retention bonus. Pete carried that account for 8 months, and suddenly Brad's claiming strategic oversight credit. Tony's got that quiet competence you see in career NCOS. He doesn't waste words. Pete didn't fight it. HR called it aligned with VP support structure or some corporate nonsense. Pete's been updating his resume ever since. First data point confirmed. This wasn't opportunism. This was standard operating procedure. Later that morning, I was walking past Sharon Martinez's desk in finance when I heard her on a call. Something about bonus allocation disputes. After she hung up, I stopped by. Sharon's been here 12 years, processes every performance payout in the company. She knows where the bodies are buried. Jake, right, Langston Project? She looked tired. Let me guess. Brad's claiming joint credit after the fact? I nodded. He did the same thing to me on the Morrison account. 9 months of budget reconciliation work. Then Brad shows up the last week with some post-signature contract amendment that redirected my performance bonus into a team success pool. Guess who the only member of that pool turned out to be? Sharon pulled up a file on her screen, showed me the amendment. Brad's signature, dated after the client had already approved final payments. Clean, legal, and completely unethical. You documenting everything? She asked, every keystroke. Good, because HR won't help you. They're scared of anyone above director level. By lunch, I had a third data point. Danny Wright from Contracts mentioned Brad had once restructured a deal midstream, moving performance incentives through channels that somehow always flowed back to Brad's quota numbers. The pattern was clear. Brad wasn't just stealing my bonus. He was running a systematic operation. But instead of getting angry, I did what you do in logistics. I mapped the supply chain, found the weak points, started building a better route to the objective. The objective was simple: keep my bonus and neutralize Brad's ability to do this to anyone else. Military planning teaches you to think 3 moves ahead. Brad was playing checkers. I was playing chess. I spent that evening at home doing reconnaissance. Alex was at soccer practice, Riley was upstairs doing homework, and I had the kitchen table to myself. Spread out every document from the Langston engagement like I was planning a supply route through hostile territory. Email threads going back 8 months. CRM entries showing every client interaction. Calendar invites for every call, every meeting, every crisis session. The evidence was overwhelming. Brad's involvement was minimal at best, fraudulent at worst. The real foundation of my operation was Colonel Porter. Alan Porter, retired Air Force procurement, now VP of operations at Langston Manufacturing. We'd connected from day one because he recognized military discipline when he saw it. The man appreciated thoroughness, accountability, and someone who didn't need 3 explanations to understand a requirement. Over 6 months, I'd earned his trust the hard way. Late-night calls when their system went down. Weekend work sessions when deadlines got moved up. That time, I drove 3 hours to their facility when their internet went out and we had a critical deployment window. Brad had never been on a single one of those crisis calls. Porter and I talked like 2 professionals who'd both carried real responsibility. When he mentioned his granddaughter Emma during one call, when his daughter brought her by the office, he didn't skip a beat. Just introduced me like family. This is Mr. Sullivan, honey. He's helping Grandpa fix the computer problems. That's trust you can't manufacture at a networking event. Thursday afternoon, I made a tactical decision. Instead of scheduling a formal meeting, I picked up the phone and called Porter directly. No digital trail, no corporate oversight, just professional to professional. Alan, it's Jake Sullivan. Got a few minutes? Always have time for you, Jake. What's on your mind? I wanted to run something by you about our contract language. We're looking at some internal team restructuring for Phase 2, and I want to make sure we maintain the continuity you need. What kind of restructuring? His voice got that edge I'd heard when he dealt with his own internal politics. I kept it factual. Some discussion about joint leadership structures for the final rollout. Given what happened with your previous vendor, I thought you'd want visibility into any changes. Porter didn't hesitate. Jake, you've been our single point of contact since day one. Far as we're concerned, you're the reason this integration didn't collapse back in month 3 when we had that network security crisis. Any suggestion that someone else suddenly co-managed this project would be problematic for us. There it was, the opening I needed. Would it help if we formalize that expectation in writing? Just to prevent any confusion down the road? Absolutely, draft whatever language you think protects both sides. We'll review it with our legal team. I already had the language drafted. Had spent the previous evening crafting contract terminology that would make any change in primary relationship management during the performance evaluation period grounds for voiding the entire incentive structure. Not because of internal politics, but because client continuity was paramount. 20 minutes later, Porter had the draft amendment in his inbox. Professional language that basically said if anyone other than the designated primary contact tried to claim joint credit, the performance bonus became null and void. Clean, legal, and absolutely lethal to Brad's operation. Porter's response came back in under an hour. Language looks solid, protects our interests, and maintains project accountability. We'll get this executed tomorrow. I leaned back in my kitchen chair, surrounded by deployment timelines and contract amendments. Alex's soccer gear was piled by the back door. Riley's college brochures were stacked on the counter next to my dad's memory care invoices. All the reasons I couldn't afford to lose this fight. The trap was now armed. Brad could keep making his moves, but every step forward would be one step closer to triggering the very clause he didn't know existed. All I had to do was give him enough rope to hang himself with. Military logistics teaches you patience. Sometimes the best move is letting the enemy advance into your kill zone. Brad thought he was maneuvering for position. What he was really doing was walking into a carefully prepared ambush. Time to see how good his networking skills were against actual preparation. Brad took the bait Tuesday morning at 8:14 a.m., right on schedule. His email hit my inbox with the subject line Q3 Client Win Summary, Strategic Next Steps Forward. The whole thing was wrapped in corporate celebration language. Exclamation marks, bolded achievements, even a stock photo of diverse professionals shaking hands that definitely came from Getty Images. But buried in paragraph 3 was the kill shot. Grateful to have partnered closely with Jake throughout this engagement, especially as we co-facilitated Phase 2 implementation and stakeholder alignment protocols. Our integrated approach ensured optimal client satisfaction metrics across all deliverable touchpoints. Translation in plain English: I was here the whole time, splitting the work 50-50. I didn't reply immediately. Military communications protocol teaches you to never respond when you're the target. Let the enemy reveal their full position before returning fire. Instead, I forwarded the email to myself with a timestamp note and filed it in my evidence folder. By noon, the real offensive began. Marcy from payroll sent me Brad's amended compensation request with no subject line, just 4 words. You need to see this. The PDF was corporate bureaucracy at its finest. Clean letterhead, official language, complete fabrication. Project Langston Manufacturing Integration Q3. Primary contact: Jake Sullivan, strategic co-lead, Brad Kellerman. Recommend 50-50 performance-based payout distribution as per verbal agreement during Q3 project wrap sessions. Verbal agreement. Those 2 words were Brad's signature move. Have a conversation in a hallway, reference it later in writing, and suddenly it becomes documented history. The man had turned plausible deniability into an art form. I still didn't react. Instead, I opened my calendar and looked at Thursday's standing client call. Same 11 a.m. slot we'd maintained for 26 weeks straight. Same participants, me, Colonel Porter, sometimes their technical lead if we were discussing implementation details. This week I made one tactical addition: Harold Briggs, CEO, Stonebridge Consulting. Brad spotted the meeting within 30 minutes. His reply came back with that breathless enthusiasm of someone who thinks they're about to claim their prize. Adding myself to Thursday's touch base. Perfect opportunity to showcase our collaborative success model and discuss strategic value propositions for Phase 2. Perfect. He was walking directly into the trap. That evening, I did something that might have looked risky to someone who didn't understand the full tactical picture. I called Colonel Porter from my kitchen while Riley was upstairs and Alex was finishing homework at the table. No corporate email systems, no digital documentation. Just voice to voice like the old days. Jake, how's everything looking for Thursday? That's actually why I'm calling, Alan. Wanted to give you a heads up about some internal dynamics on our end. Porter's voice shifted to that alert tone I'd heard when he dealt with vendor problems. What kind of dynamics? Nothing that affects our deliverables, but there's been some discussion about retroactive project attribution. Some folks looking to claim joint leadership roles after the fact. You mean someone's trying to take credit for your work? I kept it professional. Let's just say there's more noise in the background than usual. Thought you should know before tomorrow's call, given how important continuity is to your operation. Porter didn't hesitate. Jake, we've been working with you exclusively for 6 months. You've been in the trenches with us through every crisis, every deadline, every technical challenge. Anyone trying to rewrite that history now is going to have a problem with our legal department. Appreciate that, Alan. Just wanted to make sure we're all aligned. We'll clarify it on the call tomorrow. You can count on that. Thursday morning, 10:57 a.m. I was staring at the Zoom interface like it was mission-critical equipment. 26 weeks of work, my family's financial stability, and Brad's entire career were about to collide in one conference call. The familiar chime started exactly at 11 o'clock. Colonel Porter has joined the meeting. 2 seconds later, Harold Briggs has joined the meeting. Then Brad's video tile appeared. Camera positioned perfectly, teeth whitened to television standards. "Morning, everyone," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. Porter nodded from behind his desk at Langston. "Jake, Harold, good to see you both." Brad leaned forward like he was about to pitch the deal of the century. "Alan, always a pleasure to connect. Really excited to discuss our integrated success framework and value optimization strategies for Phase 2. I let that corporate nonsense hang in the air for exactly 3 seconds. Then I shared my screen. Clean document titled Langston Manufacturing Q3 Performance Review. Final documentation. 3 pages of bullet points, timeline data, and factual analysis. Before we discuss next steps, I said, voice steady as concrete, I wanted to confirm the performance bonus recipient designation per our updated contract language. I was watching Colonel Porter's face on screen. The man had that military bearing that comes from 30 years of procurement decisions. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded, and said, "Absolutely." "Jake, can you confirm who our designated primary contact has been throughout this engagement?" The question hung there like ordnance waiting to detonate. Brad, bless his perfectly coached presentation skills, couldn't resist the opening. "That would be myself and Jake Sullivan," he announced with the confidence of someone delivering quarterly results to shareholders. Co-leads for integrated Q3 delivery optimization. I didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched Porter's expression shift from professional courtesy to something much colder. Porter looked away from his camera for a moment, probably checking the contract amendment we'd signed 3 days ago. When he came back, his face was military stone. "I see. Well, Brad, as per Section 3C of our updated service agreement, which was finalized this week specifically to address continuity requirements, any bonus redistribution or deviation from the designated primary contact without prior written client approval renders all performance-based compensation null and void." Brad's smile flickered. "Just for a second, but I caught it," Porter continued without pause. "This language isn't negotiable. Jake Sullivan has been our exclusive interface since project initiation. His name appears on every deliverable, every approval workflow, every crisis resolution. Any claim of co-leadership at this stage constitutes a material breach of our continuity requirements." Harold was looking directly at me now, not at Brad. His jaw was tight. "If Brad Kellerman is listed as co-recipient of performance compensation," Porter said with the finality of a court ruling, "that action voids our entire agreement." "Is that Stonebridge's intent?" The silence could have stopped traffic. Brad's mouth was open, prepared to deliver whatever explanation he'd rehearsed, but no sound came out. Across the screen, Harold was reading something on his monitor, probably the same contract language that was currently destroying Brad's career. "Wait. I think there's been a misunderstanding here," Brad finally managed, his voice climbing half an octave. Harold looked up from his screen. "Brad, is there any documented evidence, internal or client-facing, that establishes you as co-lead on this project prior to your compensation request?" I provided strategic oversight and stakeholder engagement optimization. That's not what I asked. Dead silence. I maintained eye contact with Harold's camera, letting the weight of 6 months of documentation speak for itself. I have complete project records available in the shared folder, I said calmly. Timeline analysis shows no co-lead arrangement existed prior to this week. Harold clicked something, accessing the evidence folder. His expression got darker with each document he opened. Porter leaned forward in his chair. Gentlemen, let us know how you want to proceed. If Jake Sullivan remains our sole designated contact, we're ready to finalize Phase 2. If not, we'll exercise the termination clause and seek alternative solutions. Then Porter muted himself. Not disconnected, just muted, leaving the corporate silence to do its work. Brad looked like someone had just told him his trust fund was counterfeit. I didn't intend to imply, "Get off this call," Harold cut him off. But I think if we just... Now, Brad's video tile went black. The silence that followed felt like the aftermath of a controlled demolition. Porter unmuted himself. Jake, we'll need updated timeline documentation for Phase 2 with confirmed single-point accountability. End of week work for you? I'll have it to you by Thursday, Alan. Good. Harold, pleasure meeting you. Jake's been consummate professional throughout this entire engagement. We're looking forward to continuing with him exclusively. The call ended. I closed my laptop and sat in my office chair, surrounded by the familiar hum of corporate life continuing around a crater where Brad's career used to be. Within 2 hours, 3 emails hit the company distribution list. Administrative leave pending investigation. Internal audit review of performance attribution practices. All inquiries directed to legal. The office atmosphere shifted like air pressure before a storm. People spoke in quieter voices. Brad's corner office stayed dark. His motivational posters about disrupting paradigms and optimizing synergies looked like artifacts from a civilization that had suddenly vanished. The predator had been neutralized. Now came the systematic cleanup. The fallout came in waves, not all at once like I'd expected. Friday morning brought the first complication. Harold's assistant called at 7:30 a.m. Legal needs to see you before the board meeting. 9 o'clock sharp. I walked into the conference room expecting strategy discussion. Instead, I found 3 lawyers, 2 executives, and a stack of documents that looked like preparation for congressional testimony. The general counsel, Patricia Webb, gestured toward the chair across from her like I was about to be deposed. Jake, we need to understand the timeline of your contract amendment with Langston. Specifically, when you proposed the continuity clause and what your intent was. Intent. Legal speak for are we about to get sued for constructive dismissal. I kept it factual. Client expressed concerns about vendor consistency based on previous bad experience. I drafted language that protected both parties' interests. Standard risk mitigation. Webb made notes, and Brad Kellerman had no knowledge of this amendment? Contract changes go through client legal and our contracts department. Internal distribution isn't my responsibility. She nodded. That was the right answer, apparently. But I could see where this was heading. Even though Brad had destroyed himself, the company was worried about liability. His termination needed to be bulletproof, which meant my documentation had to be beyond reproach. We'll need every piece of evidence you have. Complete timeline, client communications, internal records. Can you have that compiled by Monday? I'd been carrying that documentation around for 2 weeks. I can have it to you in 2 hours. The actual board consultation didn't happen until Tuesday. Same glass conference room, different stakes. Harold, the SVP, General Counsel, and me. No pleasantries this time. Just damage assessment. Jake, walk us through client recovery strategy, Harold said without preamble. I'd rehearsed this briefing since Thursday. Clinical presentation, military style. Original deal structure, 6 months of relationship building, the contract amendment that Brad had unknowingly triggered, Colonel Porter's final position. Bottom line, I concluded, Langston will continue if we maintain sole contact continuity and clean performance attribution moving forward. The SVP looked up from his legal pad. What if they decide to terminate anyway? Use this as an excuse to renegotiate terms? I'd been thinking about that possibility all weekend. Porter's military background values reliability over cost savings. They'll stick with us if we prove we've addressed the internal problem. And have we? Harold asked. That was the real question. Brad was gone, but the system that enabled him was still intact. HR policies that rubber-stamped executive requests. Finance procedures that didn't verify attribution. Performance management that rewarded politics over production. Brad's termination sends a message, I said. But we need structural changes to prevent this from happening again. Webb nodded. Legal is reviewing all performance-based compensation protocols. This won't happen again. Do it, Harold said. By Wednesday, I had the updated Langston contract. Clean language. My name hard-coded as exclusive primary contact. Bonus structure protected against future manipulation. But the real validation came Thursday morning. Colonel Porter called my direct line at 8:15 a.m. Jake, got your phase 2 timeline. Looks solid. Question for you, though. You interested in expanding this relationship? How do you mean? We're looking at similar implementations across 3 other divisions. Different scope, but same complexity. 18-month engagement, significant performance incentives. Interested? 3 divisions? 18 months. The kind of project that builds careers instead of just paying bills. Absolutely interested, Alan. Good. I'll send over the preliminary scope this afternoon. And Jake, this stays between you and me until contracts are signed. No joint leadership discussions, no strategic oversight claims. Just you. I understood. Porter was making sure lightning didn't strike twice. The promotion came Friday. Harold called me into his office, same conference room where I'd briefed the board. But this time he was alone and there was a folder on the table with my name on it. Senior account strategist, effective immediately. Base salary increase. Equity component tied to client retention metrics. You earned it. I picked up the folder. Clean letterhead, professional language, recognition for what I'd actually accomplished instead of what someone else claimed I'd accomplished. The board was impressed, Harold continued. You didn't just save a client relationship. You exposed a structural weakness in how we evaluate contributions. That's executive-level thinking. But even promotion came with complications. Brad's termination had created a VP-level gap in business development. His accounts needed reassignment, his team needed new leadership, his pipeline needed management. The company was offering me the position. I appreciate the consideration, I said, but I'd rather stay client-facing. Management means politics. I prefer working with people who value results over rhetoric. Harold smiled for the first time since this whole situation started. That's exactly why we need you in management. Think about it. I spent that weekend at home, really at home for the first time in months. Saturday morning, I paid all the bills on my kitchen table without calculating which ones could wait. Alimony, child support, Dad's memory care, Riley's college deposit. The numbers added up to solvable instead of impossible. Sunday, Alex had a soccer game. I sat in the stands with other parents, watching kids run around a field, thinking about how close we'd come to losing this kind of normal family moment. The bonus would cover 6 months of security. The new Langston contract would cover the next 18 months. For the first time since the divorce, I wasn't choosing between my kids' activities and my dad's care. Monday brought one final complication. Brad tried to return to the office. Security called my extension at 9:30 a.m. Sir, we have a Brad Kellerman in the lobby claiming he's supposed to meet with you about project transition. I walked downstairs. Brad was standing by the reception desk in a fresh suit, briefcase in hand, looking like nothing had happened. Like Thursday's call was just a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with the right conversation. Jake, glad I caught you. Thought we should discuss transition protocols for the Langston relationship. Make sure nothing falls through the cracks during the handoff process. The man was still speaking corporate, even when his corporate career was over. Brad, you're on administrative leave. This conversation needs to happen through HR and legal. Come on, Jake, we're both professionals here. Let's just grab coffee and work this out like adults. I looked at him standing there, still believing his own networking mythology. Still convinced that the right words in the right order could override documented facts and signed contracts. The situation's been worked out, I said. Through proper channels. With complete documentation. Security escorted him back to his car. I watched through the lobby windows as he sat in his BMW for 10 minutes, probably making calls to people who were no longer taking his calls. Tuesday morning, I flew to Chicago for the client dinner I'd earned. Colonel Porter met me at O'Hare and we drove to Langston's headquarters so I could see the system integration in action. Rows of terminals running smoothly on the platform I'd spent 6 months implementing. Their staff working efficiently with interfaces I'd designed. Real results from real work. 18 months from now, Porter said as we walked through their operations center, we'll have this running across all divisions. Same methodology, same attention to detail, same single point of accountability. We had dinner at a steakhouse downtown. Porter insisted on picking up the check, said it was the least they could do for someone who'd kept their project on track through every crisis. We talked about military logistics, about the difference between leadership and management, about the importance of systems that reward competence over politics. You know what impressed me most about that whole situation? Porter asked over coffee. What's that? You never complained about Brad, never badmouthed him, never made it personal. You just documented facts and let the evidence speak. That's command-level thinking. Flying back to Chicago that night, laptop open on the airplane tray table, I was already planning the expanded Langston engagement. Real project management, not political maneuvering. Clear deliverables, defined timelines, measurable results. The kind of work that builds something instead of just claiming credit for someone else's construction. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and I allowed myself one moment of tactical assessment. Mission objectives achieved. Target neutralized. Resources secured. Operational continuity maintained. But more than that, I'd proven something to myself that 8 years in the Navy and 15 years in corporate hadn't quite settled. When the system fails, you don't have to accept failure. You document the problems, build a better system, and execute the solution. Brad had taught me that by accident. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight the system. It's to understand the system well enough to make it work the way it was supposed to work in the first place. The bills on my kitchen table were paid. My kids' college funds were secure. My dad's care was covered. Riley's acceptance letter had arrived while I was in Chicago. Mission accomplished, but more missions ahead. That's how you build a career that lasts.